Good morning. I know you all are doing good because it's Friday and you're ready to get out of here. Like you, I am on a bit of a vacation, but this is really fun for me. Number one, I am a U of A alum, so being able to be back on campus, even though it has gone through such a dramatic transformation since I was here, and I won't tell you when, it was a long time ago. It's really great and just wonderful to be back, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you today and maybe share a couple pearls of wisdom and a lot of my experience. All right, so we're going to start off. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, all three very, very powerful words. Historically, I think all three bring forth memories and events that have affected us really personally. They have affected millions of people, both inspiring them and breaking their hearts, I mean, to a degree, as we think about a lot of the things that have happened over the course of history and even recently. The meaning of these words is embodied in Martin Luther King's speech that we celebrated around not just the United States, but around the globe over the past month, as we celebrate his words and the ideals that he so eloquently shared around equality. But even as Americans, I think, believe these values, and people around the world largely believe in these values, we live in a time that I would call blistering rhetoric, and the actions that we see people take evoke just the opposite of what we maybe aspire to be. Shameful speech of political leaders, the reemergence to a degree of white nationalism, and even onto the public stage, and revelations of widespread sexual harassment are pervasive. Look at any social media page any single day and you see any one of those things happening. And not since the early 1970s, quite frankly, do I believe, have we seen this level of anger and level of anxiety with matters of race and gender. It's a really interesting time in all of our lives and in our history. And I would say, and not just these, there is comparable agitation, I guess, if you will, over differences in religion and class and just identity in general. And with all that going on, it seems now more so than ever that it is important for businesses like the one that I work at today and the ones that I aspire to work at in the future, the ones that all of you aspire to work at in the future, actually show up and see how embracing our differences can completely change a business landscape. All right, so when I think about the business case for diversity, it's something that came up on my LinkedIn page this morning. It comes up everywhere. And I think what's interesting to me about this is we talk about it over and over and over again. And ironically, when we do that, we re-justify the work. However, we don't ask questions about other parts of the business or business in general in the same way that we do about diversity. I mean, nobody stands up and says, what's the business case for homogeneity? What's the case for having all white men in a company? What's the case for having all Americans in an international company? We just don't talk about it that way. Nobody makes a business case like that. So let's, for a moment, not overthink the business case for diversity. There is empirical evidence. I'm sure many of you have read it, you've seen it, you've heard it, podcasts, whatever, that show that companies that have parity in their ethnic and their racial diversity in leadership are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their industry. And those in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely to have returns above their industry. Honestly, I don't know of a CEO alive today that wouldn't lean in to a number that says they get me 15 or 35% better business returns. That's crazy. Like, why would you not do that? And so, yes, it's the right thing to do. It's been proven over and over again that positive results come from diversity. So, and ultimately, when I think about it, it makes businesses not only more profitable, but it makes them more innovative and it makes them more sustainable. And it's the primary reason why we should be talking about diversity in companies, not for any other reason. So one of the biggest dangers, as I think about business today, that faces corporate America is in creating an environment where everybody seems to be taking the same actions for the same reasons, right? There's just this whole concept of groupthink. And the lack of diversity really is an enemy in organizations today. We think about, I spend a lot of time, I'm not in our HR organization, but I think a lot, and I spend a lot of time in thinking about what are the critical things, the risk factors, if you will, in our business. And oftentimes, this isn't one that comes up, but it should be coming up. It should be at the forefront of our thought. Because really, just having the ability to have another person in the room who thinks differently brings a competitive advantage. You may not see it in the moment, but it does. So I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers the other day, and we got into talking about politics, which we don't usually do at work, but it was on the topic of diversity. And they raised a great point. They said, hey, listen, if you don't know somebody at your company who voted for Trump or somebody who voted for Hillary in the last campaign, you are missing out. You are missing something critical because you are surrounding yourself with too many people who think and act and do as you do. It was just an interesting point. But it's that kind of bias, as I said, that really is one of the dangers of corporate America today. If we don't have all the voices present in the room, as I said, that we need to have, or we ought to have in order to develop great products or to market to customers, we're definitely missing something. And as technology advances and as businesses become more globalized, like mine, case in point, we are a company that is in 13 different offices at last count, maybe 14 around the world. We started as a very tiny company on Bainbridge Island, just this remote little chain of islands off the coast of Seattle, across the Sound. And we knew at the time that we would become a global company. We had big ideas. We have think Jeff Bezos kind of vision for our CEO. He knew we would be a big global company at some point. And he also knew that the problems that we're trying to solve are global in nature. I work for a tax company. Sounds really boring. Tax is boring. Death and taxes, we talk about them, synonymously, really two hard problems to try to solve. But it's a really interesting field to be in. And the problems that we're trying to solve require people from all over the world to be able to do it. We would be absolutely creating our own Achilles heel if we missed out on that opportunity. So bottom line, I think I've stated the case. It's just good for business. All right, so frequently I am with groups of people and they say, hey, listen, they might look a lot like me. They might be male, they might be female, but they're white. And they say, hey, listen, I don't know what I can do. What can I personally do to change the landscape? How do I make diversity in my company, number one, something that's important, and something that I can take action on? And I often scroll past, as maybe many of you do in your social media feeds, and you see or you hear or you read personally things that are really disturbing. I talked about a few of them earlier today. And so you get this feeling inside that says, I know I feel awful, but I don't know what to do about it. And so we're going to talk about 4 different things today that you personally can do. So just as an individual sitting here in class, that you might be able to walk out this door and go do, that might affect your ability to make a change going forward. So, and if nothing else, it changes your perspective. So throughout your personal relationships and then as you go forward and work in a place of business. So I also get asked, well, what happens if I don't work in an HR organization? How can I be somebody that actually influences and makes change? And it comes up more frequently than maybe you might even think. But I am here to tell you that regardless of the role that you're in within a company, you have the ability through your personal impact, what you do, what you say, who you talk to, and actions that you can take within your organization to actually change it. So let's talk about what those 4 categories are. The first one is called Know Where You Stand. What is your personal orientation towards diversity? And we'll get into what that looks like. The second is flip a page, really about education. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. The third I like to call Be a Tourist. And I could have captured a kind of another title for this called Be the Only, but Be the Tourist, and we'll talk about what that means. And then last and most important, the speak up and speak out, and speak loudly when you do it. There's a lot that can happen in those first 3 categories, but the last one is really where the rubber hits the road. That's what matters. All right, so orientation towards difference. I captured this slide from a group called the Winters Group. They are experts on leading through diversity and change, and so it's a graphic I borrowed from them, and happy to share with you guys as well. I know this is being recorded, you'll be able to watch it, but it's a great group for you to go and really check out if you're keen on knowing more about this. But the first category is really about denying. And the deny is when you say, there are no differences. Ooh, like between you and me, I really just honestly don't see a difference. I don't understand when people talk about differences between you and I. And categorically, there's about 2.4% of the population that falls into that deny category. Seems really crazy. Like, I can't even wrap my head around the fact that you and I couldn't see differences between one another, but apparently there's about 2.4% of the population that lands there. And then there is a group, about 13.5% of the population, that lands in this category called polarize. And think of it as a pie, that if I give more to one, then somebody else is getting less. And it's not that there is an unlimited amount of diversity that can exist. It's really about a place of equity. And, you know, there's a tug of war, I guess, is the best way to describe kind of that particular category. And even though it feels like so many people are in the polarized state, actually, most of us fit in this middle position called minimize. And it's where I know that there is a difference between you and I, but if we talk more about our similarities than we do our differences, that would be a better thing to do. And the question often arises, why is it that we have to identify and talk about our differences? So, and most people that operate in that category, that 68 or 70% of the population, would take a look and say, hey, listen, you know, men and women, really not that different. Gay and straight, not really that different. There's more about us as a group that is the same than we should be focusing on, you know, for the difference. But what happens when we do this is when we minimize, we don't have an opportunity to take advantage of the differences. You focus on what is the same and all that is unique that could be brought to a project, to an initiative, to a friendship, a relationship, et cetera, goes by the wayside because you're not talking about it. The other challenge that happens with minimization is that because so many people are there, it often becomes a bit of a confirmation bias. So if you had a belief, for example, and you said, I said something, and you acknowledged and you said, yeah, totally, that is right. And then I look at you, you're saying yes to me. All of a sudden, I really, truly believe that what I'm saying is right. And the opportunity to look at something outside of my own scope all of a sudden becomes much less important to me. So it has this kind of compounding effect, if you will. The next level that we move to is acceptance. And again, ironically, about 13.5% sit out in the acceptance space. That's where you know that there are differences between you and I. And you want to, for example, I would say, I accept that there are differences between men and women, but why does that change anything for me? It's a way of saying, I accept that there are transgender people in the world. but why does that change have to influence me? Why do I have to learn a different pronoun, for example? You, in that case, accept the change, you accept that there are differences, but you don't believe there is really anything that you personally should do about it. Basically, my life should stay the same regardless of the fact that something else is going on out there. And, you know, the interesting part about that is if we did for a moment, right? I meet a transgender person and they identify differently. I need to learn a different pronoun. At the end of the day, does that harm me to do that? I mean, definitely not. Does it make the other person feel good? Absolutely. And so there's this motion that I believe we have to get through that says, crossing that moment of making it less about you and more about the other person is how you ultimately get out to the last stage, right? Where you start to begin to adapt. And unfortunately, only about 2.4% of us live out in the adapt phase. But that is definitely, I accept that there are differences. I accept that there are challenges. For example, I see the different challenges that happen on my team and in my workplace, and I seek to understand how I can be better by understanding those differences. So, for example, if I didn't have kids, and I sought out a working mom to really understand what her experience is like, I'd want to continue to learn, to adapt, to align, right? So that we can move our teams forward in a different way than what I would be able to do if I didn't have that information. And each of us has that opportunity to change. We really do. It's more about a matter of choice, whether we elect to get there or not. And like I said, I think the question really is why not? What's holding us back? It's oftentimes, anytime I talk about change management, it is overcoming the fear. And oftentimes it's the fear of the stability, it's the fear of the unknown, it's whatever that fear is, and that's the question that has to be asked. What would change for me? What am I afraid of if I acknowledge the new pronoun and if I use the new pronoun? All right, so difference. There we go. All right, so the second category is really flip the page. It's about education. It's about learning. And this category exists because many times when people say, what can I read? What can I go do? And you sit out here every day learning, reading as probably a big component of your education as well. And so maybe like you see it as something that is an active thing that you do as opposed to being more passive. And really what makes the words on the page or the podcast that you listen to come to life is what you go do then about it. But I do like to think about reading being active. And so a lot of times people ask me, what are the great books that you've read? What are the things that I could maybe go tap into? So I throw this up here just as a quick acknowledgement of books that have either been recommended to me. The White Fragility book in particular often comes up in a lot of the conversations that I'm in and is really quite phenomenal. Some others, actually, I haven't read one or the two on the bottom, but our head of engagement and diversity at Avalara highly, highly recommends them, says they're absolutely phenomenal. But in short, it really is about getting out there and getting educated. And it's something that you can do in time that works for you along with your schedule. But it's just taking that action and that opportunity to go forward. The other thing I would challenge you to do is certainly try to pick books or to listen to podcasts, to read short articles that not only are about things that you don't know, but oftentimes give you a different perspective, put you into a different place and time. That's really the challenge of how to think differently. And you don't have to change, right? Thinking back to where are you in the curve? You don't have to change just because you read it, but it's really important just to open up your mind and get a new perspective. All right, so there is a reading list. Okay, the next two slides I'm going to come off the beaten path. So 4 categories again. These next 2 slides, I think are important to kind of help you process along that curve, but they're not specific categories. So another way that I think about becoming educated is learning not just through the written word, but the spoken word, the word of experience, if you will. And so if we're on a journey to understand, we absolutely should be asking questions of as many people with as many different experiences as possible. But there's a nuance to this, and it's a really important nuance to understand. So if using my example again, I said, hey, I really want to understand what it's like to be a working mom. And that person takes the time to explain it to me, I mean, really genuinely opens up and spends that time. I need to realize that it isn't a job for her to tell me those things. It's not part of her job. They are being very kind to me in telling me about their experience, and I need to treat it as a gift. It's not an obligation of theirs to do that. And if I were to ask an employee of mine or a manager or a teammate, same thing, right, in a work environment. What is it about this thing? Help me understand. They are willingly, if they do it, taking it on. They don't have the obligation to do it. And I need to treat that with the respect that it's due. So if I asked, for example, my head of diversity and engagement happens to be African American. And if I asked her, hey, what is it like to be a Black woman in technology? And she takes the time to sit down and tell me, she knows what it's like because she lives it every single day. I have no idea. I got the female in tech piece, but I don't know what it's like to be a Black female in technology. I also have an obligation then to not only treat that information with respect, but to know what to do with it. And she shared with me, candidly, you would not believe the number of people that she has had a conversation with about being a Black female in technology that then gets somehow transpired and transposed into being about all Black women in technology. And that's where maybe we've missed something along the way. Just because I have a particular experience or because she does, it is not representative of an entire ethnicity and of an entire gender. And I do think that as I think about that information and that gift that she gave me, that would be really disrespectful to do that. But she said it is unbelievable, really, how many times that actually happens. All right, so moving on from that, the other piece that I want to talk about, oh, I'm sorry, missed the button on that one, is allyship. What does being an ally really mean? And this is a question, actually, I'd love to just, a quick show of hands. You know, there's a lot up here, but has anybody really experienced what being an ally for another group really looks like? It's okay, you can be brave. Anybody, show of hands? Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, as you have written out there, it's about like, it's about them, it's not about you.
Yeah.
And it's about supporting them. So when I went for GHC, I was really trying to understand, like I wasn't a perfect ally, but I was trying to understand what it means to be an ally. And it's very different from what we sometimes assume it to be.
Yeah.
Like, there are vested interests sometimes, but it's not about you at all. It's about the other group and how, like all the things that you were talking about. Being respectful, trying to understand that it's a gift. That was a very good point. So I think it's about understanding that, being mindful, and supporting the people.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. It really isn't about you, right? It's about taking up and doing something for someone or some group that you really don't have a vested interest in. I mean, seeing 26,000 women show up at Grace Hopper and 5 guys, there were probably more than 5, you were one, but really being able to see men in the audience is really what true allyship actually looks like. Being able to speak up and speak out and represent that group in a way that really doesn't bring benefit necessarily to you directly, really important. For example, I had this question posed to me, and we mentioned the ERGs in the kickoff. So just founded our first employee resource groups, and people, many other leaders have come to me and said, hey, listen, how can I be an ally for your group? What does it look like to show up and do the things? And the example that I gave, because this actually happened, was somebody came to a presentation that we had done. So we had an outside speaker come in, and we've got these really cool bleachers, if you will, inside our office that span 2 floors. So it's a great place it's a communal place for people to come. We've got a big screen, et cetera. And so this person comes to me and says, hey, I'm really excited about coming and hearing this speaker and really being engaged and representing and being an ally for Women of Avalara. And so I let that go for what it was. Person shows up, fantastic, we love to have them there. And then went away. Didn't really engage with the group afterwards, wasn't doing any presentations, wasn't representing and trying to drive engagement or drive any of our other pillars around community or culture forward for Women of Avalara. And so I went back to, it was a male, and I went back to this particular peer of mine and said, hey, listen, I'd really like to have this conversation again around allyship. And he said, just as being as honest really as he could, he said, I showed up. And I said, absolutely, you definitely showed up, and we appreciate your support. We love having you there. But it can't just be about coming and sitting on the bleachers. Like, that's step one. But really what I need you to do is be out there talking to your teams for a group that you don't really have any net benefit to if you go and engage at that level. That's really what being an ally looks like. And the interesting fact, and I think this was the piece that really landed with him, was when you think about credentials of being an ally, you don't give yourself the credentials. Somebody gives them to you. So for example, the Women of Avalara group kind of need to say, oh yeah, I recognize you so-and-so as an ally of our group. Food for thought on that one. All right. Next. Be a tourist. So we've talked about knowing your orientation, talked about the education piece of it and how important that is. The third category in the what can I do is putting yourself into a situation where you're the only. So think about that for a minute. Where have you been lately where you are the only? Any hands on that one? It's an interesting spot to be in. As a female, maybe you're in a room with only men. Yeah?
So as somebody who was there, so I worked in Royal Bank of Scotland before this, and I was the only woman in the team.
Yeah? How did that work out for you?
It was weird.
Yeah, it is a little bit weird.
Because the company from which I switched in, that had 50% representation of women. But then when I moved to RBS, I was the only one working along with 7 other people. And that was the entire team, like 8 people with just 1 women team. So there was a diversity group that was being there, that was being led by some female, I think MD. And I joined that in order to meet more women and socialize more, because here it was all men. So.
Yeah. Sometimes you're the only, not by choice.
Yeah.
As your example was. I might be the only female reporting to the president of the company in the very near future. We'll see. Maybe if our efforts to recruit differently pan out, then I won't be the only. So again, some of it's not in your control. But this is really about choosing to be the only. So if there's, I don't know, a coffee shop that you frequent, choose a different one, right? Choose one in a different part of town. Choose one outside your neighborhood. Choose one to, choose to be in a different community. The things that you can learn and the things that you experience, both positive and negative, they're not always great, but they are eye-opening. They give you perspective. I travel a lot for my job. I am often the only, when I'm in India, I am the only white female in a crowd of, whether it's within our company or it's the Women's Technology Conference, Grace Hopper, that I was at in Bangalore. And that I'm oftentimes the only when I fly through Dubai. So again, only maybe white female. And it causes me to pause, to really think about what is out and outside, what's around me, how I look, how I act, how I feel. And it has made me so much more aware of what being the only, when I'm not the only, might feel like. And how important it is for you as a person to not only recognize that, but to do something about that. Because being the only is lonely. It can really be lonely. On a recent trip, kind of two stories. Actually, it was the trip I went to Grace Hopper in Bangalore. We traveled, it was the first part of the trip to Florida. And there was a group, just happened to be a large group of women coming from one company, and all on the plane together. And I don't know, maybe they had coordinated, they all got seats in the same section, but suffice it to say, there was one man in and around that section. And he was absolutely mind blown over the fact that there were so many women together going one place. And he just honestly couldn't wrap his mind around what his position was as the only man, really virtually in a plane of many, many people, of women going to a technology conference. And it was eye-opening for me. The second piece of that same trip was when we actually got to India. And as I said, my head of engagement and diversity is Black. And I thought it was unique for me to be in India. Wow. Traveling with her was a whole new ballgame. I don't know that there was anything from a negative intention perspective, but people stop when she's in their presence. And just because it's different. She is just different. She is a female leader in technology. She's out and about, she's presenting, but just the color of her skin was enough to make people stop, stare, and in some ways really uncomfortably. And so I was the only, but also in the presence of somebody who was the only, watching as an observer. Whoa, that caused me to really pause and go back to that question of, wow, Amelia, does this happen all the time for you? What does that feel like? How do you work through that? And really with honest intent and with pureness of, the intent to take action and do something different about that. And I'll tell you another connected story about that in a minute. So the be the tourist, put yourself in the situation where you're the only. And the last category that I would say is to don't be this guy. Your obligation, once you've gone through figuring out where is your position, where is your orientation towards diversity, you've educated, you've asked questions, right? You've gone out, you've put yourself in the position of being the only, not all the time, but just enough, again, to gain some perspective. You can do all those things, and you can be the best ally. But this guy that's sitting right here, right, on top of the megaphone with his laptop, is like the guy that says, great, I've just acquired all this information. I'm just going to sit here, and I'm not going to do a darn thing about it. And that's the miss, right? You want to be this guy or this gal, right? You're the one that's rising up and saying, hey, give me the megaphone. Give me the opportunity to go speak on somebody's behalf where I just don't have that vested interest. There was a post the other day on Twitter about Joaquin Phoenix, and same thing, got up without any kind of prior involvement for a group, but just became interested, got educated, and went out and did a speech on behalf of a group of people that don't look like him at all. That's what being that guy looks like. So when I think about that for me, as a leader in a technology company, what can I go and do differently than what I'm doing today? And, honestly, I would tell you guys there's a lot that I can do. And I really want to tell this story because it's personal to me and it's really important. But, things that I can do proactively to be that guy is to really speak up and hold my executive team accountable, hold my HR and recruiting team accountable. There's a lot of ways in which we've done that. I've done that personally. But, I do a lot of hiring I have over 400 people in my team. So whether I personally hire them or not, I'm accountable to the diversity in my team. And I want to ensure that we are changing job descriptions so that we're not unintentionally excluding people from even applying, right, for jobs. I want to be able to seek candidates of a particular ethnicity or a particular gender, or maybe even of a particular age, as long as it's not discriminatory, for particular positions. Because again, strength of the team improves, innovation improves, groupthink goes out the window, et cetera. I recently interviewed a candidate, and this was a new one, complete new one on me, but I interviewed a candidate who has some pretty big diversity across his team in age, but there's a big gap in the middle. So there are people that have been there for 20 plus years at a company, and then other people who are first year or first time job, maybe second time job, but effectively millennials. And typically you would have a mentorship program where the people who have been here for a while are the ones mentoring the millennials. No. He said, nix that idea. We're going to take the millennials and we're going to mentor the people who've been here for a long time, because we're having a hard time these people are having a hard time adapting into how millennials think, how they work. And so they did a one-on-one. It was not successful in all cases, but it did have an interesting success rate around the people who wanted to get engaged were very, very curious. And it changed the dynamics of how a lot of projects happened, how teams came together. And he said, it's something that he's going to continue to do. I just found that really interesting. I don't know that I'm quite ready to go that far yet, but it's not a bad idea. As I've talked about, companies also typically struggle to innovate because they are so transfixed on their old way of doing things. Getting that diverse array of employees in there, in particular, like I said, for a company like mine who is out there trying to solve a really hard problem. Tax is just atrociously hard. In the United States alone, I'll give you 30 seconds of tax, and then I promise I'll get off tax. But there are 12,000 taxing jurisdictions in the United States alone. They change their mind every single day. And if you're a business, a small business, or an enterprise business who is out there, you have to be on top of those changes so that you can accurately collect and remit. Otherwise, the auditor comes knocking at your door and you've got all kinds of problems that have nothing to do with your business and everything to do that will hit your financials. It's a bad spot to be in. Marketplaces, everybody's out there selling on Etsy and Amazon, you name it. It is changing. It is changing the way that tax in this country happens. And it's not only this country that has that. 168 countries in the world do VAT, GST, PST, HST, right? Whatever the kind of tax you want to talk about. It is complex. And so to be able to solve those problems, there's no way I can have a team that is looking a lot like me, based in Seattle, that can go out and solve a VAT problem for somebody in Europe for a small business. They just don't have the experience and the expertise. They don't have the background to do it. We would be absolutely naive and cutting ourselves off at the knees if that's the way we operated. All right. The last thing I will say on this, the speak up and speak out. This one, again, I think really important to me. And maybe I have a slide advance here. There we go. So when Amelia asked me to head up the ERG, I am somewhat famous in my company for saying yes before I know what anything is. Somebody will say, hey, I got this new project. Hey, I got this thing. Can you just go be the leader of it? And I'm like, in the hallway, yeah, sounds great. Come talk to me in half an hour and give me the lay of the land. So her office happened to be very central to 5 or 6 floors that we work on. And a lot of people pass her office every single day as they're going up and down. And that's when she chose to have that conversation with me. Hey, can you go be the executive sponsor of our first ever Women of Avalara ERG? Yep, sounds great. Got to go. I'm late for a meeting. And off I went. And so as I got into this and really thought, wow, what did I just sign up for? What is this going to look like for me? I had a significant feeling of imposter syndrome. I'm like, yeah, okay, I know how to be an executive sponsor of a group. I can go advocate for you all day long. I can inform. I can educate. But what do I know about diversity? Like, okay, yes, I'm a female in technology, and our company is about 30 to 35% women, 60, 65% men. I have a lot of people that look like me. Not tons, we're not 50-50, but I do have a lot of people that look like me. But what do I know about being Black in our company? What do I know about working in different environments? And how can I help and go advocate for them? And she said to me, she said, just because you don't have experience doesn't mean that you don't have empathy. And it doesn't mean that you can't take action as a result of being curious, asking questions, and you're in a position to do something about it. That's why you're the best person to go do this job. So go run, go do it. Okay, so I went off and did it. But I really felt for a long time like, I don't know that I can stand up in front of a group of people, men or women, different races, that doesn't look like me, to say, I don't have the experience of knowing really what it's like. I've been very lucky in my career, in part because who I am, in part because who I'm connected to, where I've had opportunities and I haven't felt what it's like to maybe have to be the only in a way that's really frustrating, where you have to struggle. And so I had to come to terms with that, of is this something that I really felt like I could do? And the best part for me was having a light bulb moment where I said, okay, if experience, if you don't have to have the experience and you do have the empathy, what can you do today differently than what you did yesterday? Well, I realized that I traveled to every single one of our offices around the globe. We've got 3 in India, we've got 1 in Brazil, I've got offices in EMEA, and every culture is different, every group is different, et cetera. Why are you not sitting down with those groups of individuals and asking questions and being curious and creating trust and creating relationships in such a way that the information that they give you, you can go and do something with? And that's exactly what's happened. So what do our hiring practices look like? What issues do particular teams, and because it's a women's group, which we, of course, invite men to, and sometimes men do show up as allies, but it's an interesting group where oftentimes what I hear is not how do we get better per se from an outward in perspective, but how do we fix the problems we have within our own company? One of the things I heard very, very quickly coming straight out of our office in Pune from about 40 women was, we do not feel heard. We do not feel heard by our management. And many of these were managers in the office. And so there were some specifics that came out of it, and I went back and individually advocated for a lot of the people that were in the room with my peers. And then as we went up through the executive team that was in Pune to do things to change that. And we're still in the middle of that transformation. But that's how I can see my role changing. And I've been working in business for a long time, and the last 2 years of my career have been more influential, more transformational in this phase than I would say the last decade easily. Maybe the last 2 decades have been. So, all right, so let's stop talking about individuals for a minute, and we're gonna transition to companies as a whole. So you're gonna come out of Eller, you're gonna land a job, you've been thoughtful about what you personally can do in your spare time, maybe even in your work time. But as you come in as a new employee, what does that look like for you to potentially ask questions about the company you want to work for? Because don't forget, when you're interviewing, it's a two-way street. You spend more time at work than you do at home, most times. So really, really like the place that you guys go and work. And ask questions about what the culture looks like. Ask questions about their process around diversity and engagement. Because if it's important for you to see people like you, to get engaged and be engaged in the company and want to have a successful career, ask the questions up front. Those are things that you should be asking in an interview process. So 4 things that I think really companies can do to honor to even begin to have the conversation about honoring a commitment and a business case for diversity. The bummer about all of this is maybe some of you have read the McKinsey report that came out. It came out in 2018, and I think I have a link to it in the deck in case anybody wants it. But there are about half the employees that were surveyed took part in this, that they said, hey, I believe our organization sees gender diversity as a priority. And that not only they see it as a priority, but they know what to do about it, right? Because knowing and doing are 2 different things. The bummer about that is that while 76% of the businesses out there have said, yep, got it, we know the business case, there's only about 13% of them that have taken the next step, the go-do step. 13%. That's like barely anything. And in doing some of the research for this talk and some others, I've gone back in time and looked at really how long this transformation at a business level has been taking place. And this is slow. It's so slow. It just makes me want to get on the wagon even more, right? To fundamentally change it. So the worst part that I read in that study, so 13% was about enough. But the worst part about that was that 20% of the staff said that they believe that their company's commitment to diversity is just purely lip service. And that's really the disheartening part. So you can say what you know the problem is, you can have a plan and you can begin to take action, but are you really taking action? Does it really feel legitimate? And we'll talk about really what that takes to kind of legitimize a true business case and take action. At Avalara, we have taken a step forward to hire a leader of engagement and diversity. That's really gone a long way, I think, for our company. But just as a case in point, I've been there for 6 years. 2 weeks ago, I saw our very first data on gender, ethnicity, and comp ratios between men and women. It's 2020, people. It took that long of just a bunch of us pushing forward to even get our head of HR, who happens to be a female, to put that data out front. And the reason it happened wasn't because of her. She's a wonderful human being. I will say nothing wrong about her. She's fantastic, just not her priority. But the president of our company joined in 2018, and it was one of the first things he said, I want to see the numbers. I absolutely want to see the numbers. Because if we get the basics right of targets and reporting and putting a stake in the ground of the company that we want to be, then we can get there. If I don't know what the data looks like, I don't know where I'm going. I mean, you guys have probably spent a lot of time talking about that, just from what a good company practice looks like. I mean, think about any other time that I would initiate a project within my team as a head of operations. I want to make data-driven decisions, and I absolutely want to know what my target is. This is no different. But companies, for whatever reason, are afraid of seeing the data. Yeah, okay, probably your data's bad. It's not great. That's probably why we're talking about this to begin with. So again, it just came as a surprise to me, but we finally got there. So I'm going to give the high five to my team for saying, all right, now it's on me. I even had surprising data in there. I'm a 65-35 female to male team, and my leadership team is 75-25 women to men. Yes, I happen to lead as far as those statistics go in our company, but I still have work to do because my comp ratios aren't right. I was surprised as all get out to see where I had inequity between men and women, between where my teams were across all of our president's directs, right? I mean, just having the data means everything. And again, it comes back to, all right, can we set targets? Can we be accountable, et cetera? So that's the first thing that businesses can do. Second, we've talked a little bit about this, but about really using a lever to change the business. If I have not spent time looking at my job descriptions and I'm excluding people, if I have not intentionally gone out and said, I need a candidate pool that looks like X, Y, or Z, we are missing out. And again, I have to give my boss, our president, a lot of credit. In the last 6 months, there have been 3 individual instances where he has said, I want a candidate that looks like this. This is really important to me. And we had an instance where we were searching for a particular position, couldn't get the candidate. He really wanted a female in the role. Didn't really matter, ethnicity didn't really matter, but he really, really wanted a female. And he ended up firing the recruiting agency because for some reason they just couldn't find a competent female in the whole entire United States who knows how to run a support team. Hard to imagine. Recruiter got fired. But I was like, yes, all right, I love it. The other thing I think companies can really do around the hiring side is making sure that you have a diverse pool of interviewers, right? So when you've got 5 or 6 people that are searching for a candidate, it is surprising what you come up with if you had an all-male group of interviewers. I'm proud and ashamed to say what I'm about to say just because the candidate got so far through the interview process. But I was the one of 2 females on a team of, I think, 7 in the interview loop, and this was for a very senior position. And really impressed with this gentleman's credentials. Really, really, really wonderful. Really thought he could do the job. A lot of times we're a high growth company, 30 to 40% growth year on year. Went public in 2018, continuing on that trajectory. So we need a lot of people who have been out ahead of where we are so that we can go get there. And in this particular case, that's what we were looking for. So everybody focused in on that. And the 2 women, myself and one other, who were on the interview loop, adamantly said no. And everybody else was in love with this candidate. And so, as I do, I walked into my boss's office, and he said, hey, listen, tell me about this candidate. And I said, say no. I said, we should never hire him. And he said, why? And I said, for a couple of reasons. Number 1, he talked over me, really wasn't interested in anything I had to say, had an agenda when he walked in. Okay, so stylistically, don't think I really, really like him. Think about what he's going to be like when he's sitting next to me and we're having some conversation about something that's happening in the business. So stylistically, a struggle, not a deal breaker. But I said, I bet when you walked in the room, he didn't give you the up and down with his eyes. And Amit said, that's it, he's done. And I said, thank you, for once, right? I got somebody who believes me, somebody who says I'm not going to put up with that, somebody who says in this day and age, I don't care how good the candidate is, that is not somebody I want working at my company. I literally wanted to hug the man. I was so excited. And then last, I would say, the other experience that I had recently is that we were recruiting, again, for a C-level position. And again, really wanted to have some diversity in the position. Would have loved to have had a female. And got down to the top 4 candidates. And sometimes the female isn't the best candidate. And I've had this conversation many, many times with our team, with my leaders, et cetera. And as much as you want diversity in your team, sometimes you have restrictions, you have boundaries that you just can't flex. Sometimes it's, you've got a product, it's a speed to market issue, you've got to fill a position, it's impacting the business. You hire the best candidate. Sometimes it just comes down to hiring the best candidate. And in that particular case, we did. We had plenty of great women, but not the best. The best candidate happened to be a man. All right, next, making your senior leaders champions of diversity. We talked a lot about, hey, companies have a plan, companies can actually create action, but does it really feel like lip service? Every day, I think Amelia sometimes feels like she has to go to bat with the executive team. Not all, but some. And what I mean by that is if we really truly say we want a diverse company, if we want to hit 50-50 on gender diversity, if we want particular ethnic diversity in the company, it has to come from the top. It's no different than any other initiative. If my CEO said, I want to reach a 40% growth rate, every part of the business has to be bought into that. It's not just the sales team that says, great, go sell more. Diversity and inclusion, or diversity that drives inclusion, that drives engagement in the company, is no different. You have to be bought in from the top. So if you have an executive suite that is giving lip service, you won't make progress. All right, next, we have, and last, I think the 4th category, flexibility. I mean, we work in a technology era where people can work from home. And it wasn't so long ago, 5 or 6 years ago, that I joined the company and I was reporting into our CFO. He wanted butts in the seats every single day. And I said, you're just not going to sustain a workforce that has diversity of talent, that has the experience that we need, if this is the demand. I said, you're trying to get people in Seattle, which we have a lot of ethnic diversity. We have a lot of women who work in tech. Sure, we could probably find it, but is that really the right thing to prioritize versus having somebody who is adaptable and flexible and has all the other criteria, the success traits that you want, that you know will create and produce for your company? And just an old school mentality. Really just shocked the hell out of me, but that's the way he was. And maybe, I guess I would give him a little bit of credit because as CFO, a lot of the roles that he was responsible for were not operational. They're truly finance, where sometimes you kind of have to be in the seat. But that said, we, like many other companies, have adapted. And as long as there is specificity around role clarity and what success looks like, which takes some effort, it really takes effort from a manager, working with our HR team to figure out what are the roles, and the team to a degree, what are the roles where people can work remotely, can work outside the office, can be in 3 days out 2, I've got plenty of my team across the US, for example, that works in individual offices. I have people that run teams that work in individual offices. I know there's a company in Seattle, because they're headquartered there, they have no offices. Everybody works remotely. Now that might be like the polarization out here of the 98%er, but they make it work and have proven time and time again. So if you want, in particular women, who typically are the ones, those of us when we choose to have children, that take on the majority of the burden, not all of the burden, and it's individual for each and every family, but if you really want women in your workforce, you've got to create some flexibility. All right, so summary of the things that you can do. Know your orientation. What category do you fall in, and what can you do to actively move yourself to the right side of the page? Flip a page, listen to a podcast, take a minute. Be a tourist. Get out. Figure out how you can be the only in a situation and figure out what you can do to learn from that, and then actively go do something about it. Speak up and speak loudly. And as businesses, what do? Set goals. Look at the data. Don't be afraid of your data. Your data might not be pretty. I worked for not the first CFO that I was telling you guys about, but another. And every meeting I walked into with him, he started the exact same way. Tell me the bad news. Everyone. And at first, all of us were like, what? We don't want to tell you the bad news. What happens if we tell you the bad news? Then we get exposed and we can't go solve the problems. But by the end of, a year had passed, I would say, probably 12 to 18 months, we were openly, candidly talking about the bad news and the data. Because then everybody knew it and it was okay, nobody was getting fired over it, and we could set goals and we could use that to progress the company forward. But until we had that level of engagement and trust, it was really hard to do. But this is no different, right? So you set your goals, you work your baselines, and you be transparent about it. Create your hiring practices that promote diversity. Work for a company, make a choice, right? Where diversity, inclusion, and engagement are championed by your executive team. And don't be afraid to ask the question. Like I said, when you're in the interview, what's your position on diversity and engagement? Have you set targets? What's your gender ratios? What do your comp ratios look like? They might not want to tell you the answers, but you'll know whether they have a plan and whether that's sponsored by the executive team or not. And then again, your leadership team, your management team, are they creating structures where flexibility actually happens within your company? It really matters if you want to create a diverse culture where people see people that look like themselves. People want to be there. People drive up engagement that ultimately creates a financial impact to the company. So when you do that, one of the things that I didn't really talk about is, I think I probably briefly touched on it. We talked about the innovation side, we talked about the creativity side, but better consumer understanding. It's unbelievable what a product team that I worked with in partnership with didn't know about their customers because they didn't have anybody in the room that had that experience, nor did they go seek it out, which was absolutely crazy to me. But if you don't have the voices that you need in the research for the thing that you're building, you're missing. And you definitely, personally, will have a negative impact on your company's financials, where you could absolutely swing it the other way. Obviously, the brainstorming, I think, goes without saying. The opportunities that come from not only having people in the room, but inviting them into the conversation makes all the difference in the world. And better decision making with diverse perspectives, I would say, absolutely at the end of the day lead to better decisions. So I would submit to you, it's a very dangerous thing that you may not even recognize what you don't know. So don't be afraid. Ask the questions. Go find your way and move to the right. So it's your turn. As you continue your education, you round out here at Eller, you graduate, you're successful, you're entering or re-entering, right, your workforce. My hope is that you personally consider taking on some of the challenges and some of the actions, that you ask the questions of your potential employers, and you make a great choice that personally works for you in that environment. And last, be a part of your company's transformation. Don't wait for it to happen. You have a lot of tools up here that will enable you to be part of the company that you want to work for. So go do it. Go make it happen. It was a real pleasure to speak with all of you today. I really appreciate it. Thank you all very much.